Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happened when Cliff Richard walked on to Loose Women during their Black Friday special wasn't your usual lighthearted holiday banter. The audience expected cozy talk about Christmas shopping and discounts, but what they got was one of the sharpest cultural debates the show had seen all year. As soon as Cliff sat down beside Denise, you could feel a current of tension. He smiled politely, but there was something steady, even steely, behind his calm demeanor. Denise, never one to shy away from a strong opinion, kicked things off with her usual spark. "Let's be honest," she said, gesturing to the camera. "Black Friday has become a circus. People stampeding for TVs, fighting in aisles. It's lost the meaning of the holidays." Cliff didn't flinch. He leaned forward, voice soft but deliberate. "Or maybe it's just a sign of people wanting a bit of joy, Denise. A deal that lets them bring home something nice when times are tough." The audience murmured. You could sense they weren't sure which side to take. Was Cliff defending chaos or just trying to understand it? Within minutes, what started as a discussion about shopping spiraled into a fiery exchange about values, greed, and what Christmas really means in modern Britain. No one expected the pop legend to challenge the show's tone so directly, but by the end, he had everyone, even Denise, second-guessing their stance. The studio lights glowed warm and golden, giving the illusion of comfort that didn't quite match the energy brewing on stage. The Loose Women Black Friday special was supposed to be cheerful, funny segments, holiday giveaways, maybe a few emotional stories to melt hearts before the break. But the moment Cliff Richard and Denise Welch began to trade views, that cozy atmosphere cracked. Denise started strong, as she always did. "Black Friday's supposed to be about bargains," she said, shaking her head. "But now it's just chaos. People fighting over kettles like it's life or death. It's embarrassing." Cliff smiled politely, his trademark calm radiating through. "Denise, I get it," he said evenly. "But it's easy to judge when you're not the one counting every pound. For some families, Black Friday is the only day they can afford to buy something special. Maybe we should be talking about why people are that desperate, not just mocking how they act." The audience responded with a mix of cheers and gasps. Denise's brow shot up, clearly not expecting that level of pushback. "I'm not mocking anyone," she countered quickly. "I'm saying it's become toxic. The ads, the pressure, the madness, it's turning people into consumers first and human beings second." Cliff nodded slowly, his tone still measured but gaining an edge. "And yet it's a reflection of the system we've built, isn't it? You can't blame people for playing the game when the rules are stacked against them. We celebrate celebrities spending thousands on gifts, but sneer at ordinary folks grabbing a discount TV. Maybe the problem isn't the crowd, it's our hypocrisy." A murmur rippled through the audience. Colleen Nolan, sitting between them like an uneasy referee, gave a cautious smile. "All right, let's keep it friendly," she said, trying to lighten the air, but the fire was already lit. Denise leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Cliff, come on. You're acting like it's some noble act to trample through a shop for a half-off toaster. Where's the dignity in that?" Cliff's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe the dignity is in trying," he said quietly. "Trying to make your kids' Christmas a bit brighter, even when life's tough. I grew up in a modest home, Denise. I know what it's like to want to give more than you can afford." The audience erupted into applause. For a moment, the studio filled with warmth, not just admiration but recognition. Denise crossed her arms, visibly softening, but unwilling to back down. "I respect that," she admitted. "But you have to admit, it's gotten ugly. I saw a clip of people tearing boxes from each other's hands. It's not joy, it's greed." Cliff sighed gently, his voice lowering. "Greed, maybe, but also frustration. a feeling that the world keeps dangling happiness in front of you and snatching it away. Black Friday isn't the disease, it's a symptom. That line landed like a pin drop. Even the panelists went quiet. For a few seconds, it wasn't a talk show. It was a moral conversation playing out live on air. Colleen tried again to steer it back toward humor. Well, I'll just say this. I'd rather pay full price than risk a punch-up in Tesco. The audience laughed, but the tension didn't fully break. Cliff looked toward her with a faint smile, but his focus stayed on Denise. I'm not saying it's right, he continued, but I think we should look at what pushes people there before we roll our eyes at them. Denise, realizing this wasn't going to be an easy exchange, straightened up. All right then, Sir Cliff, if you think it's about empathy, not excess, tell me this. Where do we draw the line between survival and madness? The question hung in the air. The crowd leaned forward. Even Cliff paused, a thoughtful silence stretching for just long enough to make everyone wonder how he'd answer. And when he finally did, his words would shift the tone of the entire debate. The air in the Loose Women's studio had shifted. What started as a festive debate about shopping and holiday cheer had turned into something far more charged. The audience leaned forward, sensing the tension between Cliff Richard's quiet conviction and Denise Welch's fiery insistence. "Where do we draw the line between survival and madness?" Denise repeated, pressing him. Cliff took a breath, his voice steady but firm. "The line," he said, "isn't between people. It's between desperation and opportunity. People act out when they feel the system doesn't care, and Black Friday, for all its chaos, is one of the few times they feel like they're winning." Denise shook her head, eyes flashing. "Winning? Cliff, that's not winning, that's a trap. These companies dangle fake discounts and exploit people's emotions. It's predatory. You're too kind-hearted to see how manipulated people are." Cliff leaned in, the warmth in his tone now replaced by quiet defiance. "You think I don't see it? Of course I do. But I don't blame the people. I blame the culture that celebrates greed at the top while shaming the poor for grabbing a deal. You can't preach restraint to those barely scraping by." Colleen raised her hands in mock surrender. "Whoa, this is getting deep for a shopping day." The audience laughed, easing the moment slightly, but Denise wasn't done. "Cliff," she said, her tone sharpening, "you're painting this like it's some noble cause, but you're ignoring the behavior it brings out. We've all seen the viral videos, grown adults brawling over coffee makers. How is that something to defend?" Cliff's jaw tightened. "It's not the brawling I defend, it's the reason behind it. Those people you're judging might have been saving for months just to afford something decent. Maybe for them that one day of discounts is the difference between giving their family something and giving them nothing." The audience murmured again, this time with empathy. Denise's frustration cracked through. "So what? We excuse violence because life is hard? We shrug off bad behavior because the system's unfair? That's not progress, Cliff. That's surrender." He didn't flinch. "No," he replied, his voice low but commanding. "It's compassion. It's understanding why people reach their breaking point. If society worked the way it should, Black Friday wouldn't even exist." The crowd burst into applause. Even Colleen looked surprised by the depth of Cliff's words. Denise leaned back, letting out a short, dry laugh. "You sound like you're campaigning for something, Cliff." He smiled faintly. "Just humanity." For a brief second, Denise looked at him with something between annoyance and admiration. "You always had a way with words," she muttered, before turning to the camera. "Look, I get what you're saying, but there's got to be accountability, too. We can't glorify chaos and call it survival." Colleen jumped in, sensing the emotional charge rising again. "Maybe both of you are right. Maybe it's about balance. Companies need to stop exploiting people, and we, as consumers, need to keep our sanity." But Cliff wasn't ready to let the point go.
Balance is easy when you have choices, he said to Denise. Not everyone does. We talk about moral high ground from the comfort of stability. But if you've ever been broke during Christmas, you know that even a small victory feels like hope. That struck a chord. The studio fell into an unexpected hush. Denise hesitated, visibly wrestling with his words. I have been broke, Cliff. You're not talking to someone who's always had it easy. I've had those moments. I just think people deserve better than being herded into chaos once a year for the illusion of a bargain. Her honesty caught Cliff off guard. For a moment the tension softened. Then maybe we agree more than we realize, he said gently. But before the peace could settle, Janet's street porter, who had been watching with folded arms and an amused smirk, finally chimed in. Oh, please, both of you are being dramatic. It's shopping, not a moral crisis. Nobody's forcing people to queue at 4 in the morning. They do it because they love it. The adrenaline, the rush. It's a ritual now. The crowd laughed, but Cliff turned toward her with a look that could melt through irony. Janet, that's easy to say when you've never had to choose between a gift and a bill. The laughter dimmed instantly. Denise, trying to recover the tone, exhaled and smiled thinly. Well, this conversation took a darker turn than I expected. Cliff nodded, his voice quiet again, but steady. Sometimes truth does that. Colleen tried to bridge the gap again. So let me ask both of you, if Black Friday vanished tomorrow, would that make the world better? Denise didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, we'd stop feeding the frenzy. Cliff just as quickly replied, no, we'd lose one of the few moments where struggling families feel they can stretch their money. The studio split, half clapping for Denise, half for Cliff. The tension had fully reignited. Colleen smiled tightly, knowing she'd just asked the question that would carry them into the next, deeper round of debate. Because the surface argument about shopping, deals, and frenzy was about to turn into something much bigger, a clash about class, empathy, and what Christmas really means in a society where struggle has become routine. And as the camera zoomed in on Cliff's thoughtful expression and Denise's defiant stare, it was clear neither was backing down anytime soon. The atmosphere in the Loose Women studio was no longer light-hearted. The laughter had faded into a charged quiet, the kind that made even the camera operators forget to breathe. Cliff Richard sat composed but resolute, his hands folded, his gaze steady on Denise Welch, who was now leaning forward, elbows on the desk, ready for another round. Colleen Nolan tried to keep the energy balanced. So, Cliff, when you say Black Friday gives people hope, do you mean it's something we should actually celebrate, even with all the chaos it causes? Cliff nodded slowly. Hope takes many forms, Colleen. For some, it's faith. For others, it's family. And for many struggling people, it's the one day a year they feel like the system isn't stacked against them. That's not greed. It's survival. Denise sighed, tapping her pen against her mug. You keep using that word, Cliff, survival. But where's the self-control? Where's the sense of enough? My problem isn't people wanting a deal, it's what we've turned that desire into. A mob scene in the name of a flat-screen TV. Cliff met her eyes, calm but unflinching. And what about the parents who've spent months choosing between paying bills and buying their kids something special? What do you tell them, Denise? That they shouldn't be excited? That they should sit at home while others rush to grab what little joy they can grab? Denise frowned, her tone softening. I don't want people to feel ashamed of wanting joy. I just don't want them to be manipulated into thinking joy has to come in a box. That line got a murmur of agreement from the audience. Cliff didn't miss a beat. Then we agree on something. But manipulation isn't solved by scolding the people at the bottom. It's solved by calling out the people at the top. The corporations that build the chaos, advertise scarcity, and feed the frenzy. You blame the shoppers, I blame the system." Denise tilted her head. "You really think it's that simple?" "It's not simple," Cliff replied, his voice steady. "But I've seen too much hardship to believe people act out of malice. They act out of exhaustion." The audience applauded quietly, as if afraid to break the spell. Janet Street Porter crossed her legs, smirking. "Exhaustion or not, Cliff, nobody has to trample someone to get a toaster. Let's not pretend it's noble. There's a point where responsibility matters." Cliff looked at her, his eyes firm but not angry. "Responsibility starts with fairness, Janet. You can't hold the same moral expectations for those who are barely making it and those who make millions off their desperation." That drew another wave of applause. Even some of the panelists nodded. Denise, however, wasn't done. "Let me ask you this, Cliff," she said, her tone more personal now. "When you see those crowds pushing, shouting, losing it, does that make you proud of what we've become? Because to me, it looks like a symptom of something broken, a society that's forgotten restraint, patience, and gratitude." Cliff exhaled deeply. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "It makes me sad, but not for the reasons you think. It makes me sad that people are that desperate. It makes me sad that they feel they have to fight just to feel included in the world's idea of happiness. You call it chaos, I call it a cry for help." That line hit like thunder. The audience gasped, some clapping instantly, others just staring in silence. Denise's expression faltered for the first time. She looked at Cliff as if realizing the conversation had gone somewhere deeper than she had intended. "A cry for help," she repeated softly. "That's heavy." "It is, and we ignore it because it's uncomfortable. We laugh at the videos of people fighting in stores instead of asking why they're fighting. We've turned pain into entertainment." For a few seconds, the studio felt completely still. Then Denise leaned back, arms crossed, her tone quieter now, but still firm. "You're making it hard to argue with you. You know that." Cliff smiled faintly. "I'm not here to argue, just to remind us that humanity doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient." Colleen, seeing an opening, tried to ease the mood again. "So, Cliff, would you say Black Friday, chaos and all, still brings people together somehow?" Cliff chuckled. "Maybe not in the aisles, but yes, in spirit. Even when it's messy, it's people trying to care for others. That's what we should be building on, not mocking." The audience broke into applause again, and even Denise gave a reluctant smile. "All right," she said, "I'll give you that one. But you've got to admit it's gone too far. You can't deny the madness we see every year. People are camping outside stores for days. That's not healthy." Cliff nodded thoughtfully. "It's gone too far, yes, but not because of the people. It's gone too far because we've forgotten what holidays are supposed to be about. It used to be about community. Now it's competition." Denise leaned in again, her tone gentler now, but still firm. "So how do we fix it?" Cliff paused, choosing his words carefully. "By remembering that gratitude doesn't need a discount code. By teaching our kids that generosity means more than gift bags. And by demanding a world where people don't have to choose between dignity and survival." The audience applauded again, longer this time. Even Janet, who had been smirking throughout, gave a small nod. "Well, Cliff, I'll say this. You make moral philosophy sound like a Christmas carol." Cliff laughed softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." Denise looked at him with new respect, though her pride wouldn't let her fully concede. "You've got a way of turning chaos into poetry, Cliff. But don't forget, sometimes people need a bit of tough love too. We can't just keep forgiving bad behavior." Cliff nodded. "Agreed, but I'd rather live in a world that forgives too much than one that understands too little." That was the line that landed hardest. The audience rose to its feet in applause, some visibly moved. Colleen smiled into the camera. "Well, this debate started about shopping, but I think we just got a masterclass in compassion. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back." As the cameras cut to commercial, Denise leaned toward Cliff with a half smile. "You really don't let up, do you?" Cliff grinned. "Neither do you." Off camera, their laughter echoed faintly, but the conversation had left its mark on the room, on the audience, and maybe even on each other. Because this wasn't just a debate about Black Friday anymore. It had turned into a mirror for something much bigger. How a nation that once prided itself on generosity and community had turned its struggle into spectacle, and how, even now, there might still be a way back.
The break was over, but the energy in the Loose Women studio had shifted. When the cameras came back on, the air felt sharper, charged with something raw and unpredictable. Cliff Richard still wore his calm half-smile, but his eyes carried that faint glint, the kind that warned he wasn't going to back down. Denise Welch, meanwhile, sat up straighter, her expression determined. Whatever cordiality existed before the break had been replaced with something far more direct. Colleen Nolan, sensing the tension, tried to set the tone. "All right, welcome back. Before the break, we were having quite the conversation about Black Friday, why it matters, and what it says about who we are. Cliff, Denise, you two had everyone glued to their seats." Denise chuckled, a little too tightly. "We were just getting warmed up." Cliff nodded. "That we were." And with that, the gloves came off. Denise leaned in. "Here's what I can't stand, Cliff. Every year we see people, adults, storming into stores, shoving, yelling, losing all sense of decency. And yet you sit here telling me it's about hope. Where's the hope in that? Where's the line between desperation and just plain bad behavior?" The audience murmured in anticipation. Cliff didn't flinch. "There's no excuse in cruelty, Denise, but empathy doesn't mean approval. You can call it madness, but when you strip away the chaos, you see people who feel invisible, people who work hard and still can't afford the joy they're told they deserve. They act out because they're tired of being ignored." Denise's eyes narrowed. Ignored by who, though? The government? The rich? Or just life? We all have problems, Cliff, but most of us don't turn a shopping sale into a battleground. Cliff's voice dropped lower, firmer. And most of us haven't been cornered into feeling like that sale is the only chance we'll ever get. You and I, let's be honest, we live comfortably, but not everyone does. So maybe the problem isn't the crowd. It's that we've forgotten what it feels like to be on the other side of the glass. A ripple of applause followed, scattered but powerful. Denise pressed her lips together. Her pride stung. "You make it sound poetic, but there's nothing poetic about people getting hurt over a discounted blender. At some point, we have to call out the behavior, Cliff. Otherwise, where does it end?" Cliff finally leaned forward. His voice was calm, but there was fire behind it now. "It ends when people stop being treated like they're less than human for trying to get by. You call it bad behavior, I call it a reaction to a system that profits off struggle. We sit here judging them from a stage while the real problem sits in boardrooms counting profits." The audience burst into applause. Even a few of the crew members couldn't hide their nods. Denise, however, wasn't giving him the last word. "So you're saying what? Everything's society's fault now? No one's accountable for their actions? Come on, Cliff. We've all seen the footage. People dragging boxes out of each other's hands. It's greed, not poverty. You can't sugarcoat that." Cliff took a long breath. I'm saying desperation makes people do things they wouldn't otherwise do. And maybe instead of sneering, we should be asking what pushed them there. You talk about accountability? Well, where's the accountability for the billion-pound corporations that encourage this frenzy, that manipulate people into feeling worthless unless they buy more? Denise's tone sharpened. You're deflecting. You're blaming the system for human behavior. That's an easy out. Cliff raised an eyebrow. And judging people without understanding them is an easy in. The audience gasped audibly. Colleen quickly interjected. All right, let's all take a breath. But it was too late. Denise's voice rose, frustration spilling out. You know, Cliff, you talk about empathy, but I think you're romanticizing chaos. Not everything tragic is noble. Sometimes it's just people losing control. Cliff's tone turned icy, his patience finally cracking. And sometimes it's people like you losing sight of compassion. The studio erupted. The audience gasped so loudly that Colleen visibly jumped in her chair. The two sat there, facing off, the silence between them electric. Denise's eyes widened. Excuse me, she said, incredulous. Cliff didn't blink. You heard me. You've spent this whole time talking about decency, but decency starts with understanding. You can't claim the moral high ground while mocking people who are struggling. The audience clapped, some standing, others murmuring in shock. Denise leaned back, her face tightening, her voice low but trembling. That's not fair, Cliff. You don't know me. Don't you dare question my compassion. I'm not questioning your heart, Cliff. I'm questioning your aim. Sometimes the people who need compassion most are the hardest to look at. The applause was deafening now. Colleen tried to regain control, her voice barely cutting through the noise. Okay, we're going to take a short break. But Denise wasn't finished. No, let's keep going, she said sharply. If Cliff thinks I'm heartless, I want to hear him say it. Cliff shook his head. That's not what I said, Denise. But if empathy makes me naive, then I'll take naive over cynical any day. And with that, he leaned back in his chair, composed once more, the tension still humming through the air. The music swelled, signaling the commercial break. The camera panned out slowly, capturing Denise's tight-lipped expression and Cliff's calm, unshaken stare. The audience was buzzing, half in awe, half in disbelief. And as the show cut to black, one thing was certain. The next segment would decide whether this fiery exchange ended in reconciliation or complete implosion.
The final segment opened with a studio that felt completely different from when the show began. The audience was quieter, their earlier laughter replaced with that uneasy tension that lingers after something real happens on live television. When the cameras came back, Denise sat with her arms folded, staring down for a moment before exhaling and looking up. Cliff Richard, still calm but visibly tired, gave her a polite nod. Colleen Nolan, trying to find balance again, smiled carefully. "Welcome back to Loose Women. It's been quite a conversation," she said. "Before we wrap up, I think it's fair to say today's debate about Black Friday wasn't just about shopping, it was about what it represents." Denise gave a small, almost reluctant laugh. "That's one way to put it." Cliff smiled faintly. "Sometimes these things go deeper than we expect." Colleen turned toward Denise. "You've been very outspoken about what bothers you about the whole Black Friday culture. After everything that's been said, do you still feel the same way?" Denise paused. You could see her wrestling with it. "I think I still hate what it brings out in people, the greed, the panic. But Cliff made a point I can't just dismiss. Maybe I've been looking at it too much from where I'm standing, not from where others are standing." Cliff's expression softened. "That's all any of us can do, Denise. We come from our own corners of life. I'm not saying the chaos is good, I just think sometimes behind the chaos there's pain, and pain deserves a little grace." There was a long silence after that. No audience laughter, no applause at first. Just stillness. Then Denise leaned forward. "You know what, Cliff? You're right about something. I've never had to fight over a toaster in a supermarket, and maybe I can understand that kind of desperation. But it doesn't mean I don't want things to be better. Maybe instead of blaming the people, I should be blaming the system that makes them feel like that's their only shot." A wave of applause filled the studio. It wasn't wild or dramatic, more like the sound of people exhaling. Cliff nodded gratefully. "That's all I've been trying to say. We can call out the behavior and still care about the people. Those two things don't cancel each other out." Colleen looked between them with a smile. "I think that's a pretty good note to end on, finding a bit of middle ground in a world that loves to divide." Denise chuckled softly. "I'll drink to that, just not on sale." The audience laughed, the tension finally breaking. Cliff laughed too, leaning back and shaking his head. "Fair enough," he said. As the credits music began to fade in, Colleen looked into the camera. "Today wasn't just about Black Friday. It was about what we've turned it into and what it's turning us into. Whether you're one of those people out there chasing a deal or sitting at home shaking your head, maybe it's worth asking why we care so much about it in the first place." The camera slowly panned across the panel one last time. Denise smiling faintly, Cliff resting his hands together, peaceful now. "And remember, kindness doesn't cost a thing, and it never goes out of stock." The audience erupted in warm applause. As the lights dimmed and the show's theme played in, Cliff reached across and gently patted Denise's hand. She looked surprised at first, then smiled back, grateful. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was human. Two people, worlds apart in opinion, still managing to meet somewhere in the middle. If you enjoyed this powerful moment, make sure to subscribe for more emotional showdowns, unforgettable debates, and stories that remind us what really matters. Tell us in the comments, has Black Friday gone too far, or does it still bring people together in its own way?